Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Suited Kings podcast. Today we are joined by Dara O'Kearney and David Lappin of the Chip Race podcast. The Chip Race podcast has been around for over a decade and has featured some of the biggest names in poker. After this show is over, I hope you guys will check out their podcasts, where you can find a link in the show notes. Without further ado, here's Dara O'Kearney and David Lappin. David and Dara, welcome to the podcast. How are you guys doing today?
Great, thank you. Delighted to be here.
Awesome. And David, same for you?
Yeah, can't wait for this.
Yeah, so really excited to have you guys on. For those who aren't familiar, you guys are the host and co-host of the popular The Chip Race podcast. Diving into your history a little bit, I found out some cool things about you guys. Dara, you were a marathon runner, an ultra marathon runner, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. I was a recreational marathon runner for years.
Okay.
I was good, but not great. And then found out I was actually better at the really long stuff, the ultra marathons. So yeah, did that for a few years. That was a really fun time in my life.
That sounds terrible to me. I have asthma. I can't run for crap. But and then David, doing a little history check on you. It sounds like you were you got your master's in philosophy. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did an MLit in philosophy and an MA in screenwriting a long time ago now. It's probably, 15, 20 years ago.
Okay. And what kind of things did you do in the screenwriting? Is that like, are you writing like films, or what's that look like?
That was the plan. It never worked out. Poker sort of got in the way in the end, but the idea was to write some screenplays and move into television and film. I wrote a couple of feature film spec scripts. I had two quite well developed TV show ideas, which the national broadcaster in Ireland initially picked up, but eventually binned. So we were kind of thrown on the scrap heap. The reason I actually play poker for a living is because the main character in the first show I wrote was a poker player, and I was like a recreational poker player who, enjoyed £5 games with my mates and going to the casino once in a blue moon. And I thought, well, if I'm going to write this character, I should get to know his world. And I did get to know his world quite well, to the point that when they binned the TV show idea, the only thing I had left from that experience was that I'd actually got decent at cards.
Well, that's a blessing in itself. And then how did you and Dara meet?
Dara and I have a different version of this story. I'll let Dara tell his one first.
Okay, so I've been playing for a few years. I've always been based in Ireland in the time that I've been a poker player. So I had been playing for a few years. David moved back from Connecticut, where he'd been living. We had actually played together online a few times, and actually we kind of almost come to blows online. David was a good old rager in chat back in the day.
Oh, we love that. Yes, we do.
So I do remember asking a few people, who is this guy, Fishing Boy? That was his screen name at the time on Stars and Lappin, and they were both all caps as well. And I think, as a lot of people probably remember, when you saw all caps names back in the day, it was generally a sign of a fish. So I assumed that David was a fish. And I asked various people, and then I saw that the location was Ireland. And then so I asked people, and they said, oh, it must be one of the Dutch guys who moved here for tax reasons, because, Ireland is a tax-exempt country as far as poker goes. The first time I ever actually remember laying eyes on him was in a card room here in Dublin, which is sadly defunct now. But back then, I used to go a couple of times a week, called the Fitzwilliam. And we were playing the monthly, and he was loud and obnoxious at the table, let's say, kind of condescending, sneering down on everyone. And I thought, this sounds like this guy. And when I found out his name was Lappin, I thought, okay, yeah, that's definitely Lappin from online. It's the same personality. Somehow we got hanging out at the Irish Open, which was shortly thereaafter. We had a very good mutual friend at the time, John O'Cruth, who was a big online player at the time, runner once coach. And he kind of put us together. He said we'd get on quite well, which was a good read by Jono. And yeah, that was kind of how it started. I quickly realized that when you have such an obnoxious personality as David had at the time, he needed to have at least one friend. And so, I took one for the team. I took one for Irish poker to be
yeah. Wow, that's
honorable.
As much as just trying to relate with this. I feel like I'm the David
Okay.
Lappin of the situation here, and Wes
Okay,
is
there
the
we go.
Dara.
Wow. Look at that. But you know what? Look at that humility, Max.
Thank you.
I didn't even know where you were going to go with
I'm a
that.
little
So
loud. I'm a little obnoxious, and but it is what it is. But okay, let's pause here for a second, David. Let's hear your version.
Well, my version is just not really remembering the first two things. I think I raged at so many people online that was just one of many fights I'd had that day. So that particular scrap with Dara didn't stand out. He kept a low profile that day in the Fitzwilliam, didn't say hello, and just observed my obnoxiousness from afar. So we didn't actually speak that day. And then it was the Irish Open, as Dara remembers, when we were sort of formally introduced, if you will, by Jono, that I recall. And I do remember Jono saying, "You'll get on well." And I remember instantly inviting, well, at least within like maybe a couple of days or a couple of chats, realizing that we actually had a lot in common. We liked a lot of the same writers, a lot of the same movies, all that kind of stuff that you do when you first get to know someone. And I think I invited you, Dara, on what I'm going to call a mandate. To a very nice steakhouse in Dublin, where we talked about Joyce and Beckett, and we the kind of conversation that we really enjoyed that would be for very few other people. But we had a nice time, and I remember very kindly then, quite early on, Dara was a sponsored pro for a skin on the Intraction Network, and that really dates us now. And he said, "Hey, I get a package to every stop of their live tour. If you want a room with me, there's a room there," which was a very kind offer, obviously. And I didn't play a huge amount of live poker at the time, so I went and joined Dara for a trip to Estoril in Portugal, and we became good pals during that trip.
That's awesome. Again, something to relate with. I mean, Wes and I have only known each other for a few years. And then we're sitting at a poker table one day, and we're both going to go to the same stop in Colorado for an MSPT.
Yeah, I hadn't even fully decided yet, but
and I was just like, "Hey, you want to take a 14-hour trip together in my car?"
He had a free hotel room. I mean, it was plus EV.
I remember picking him up and just being like, "Okay, this is going to be some awkward conversations for the first few hours," and then just the conversation flew naturally, and all of a sudden I consider him one of my best friends. And you guys have been friends probably for what now, 20 years or so? Maybe a little under that.
We've been playing poker 20, right? But we only met maybe 13 years ago.
Okay. Yeah. So you guys were into the scene, pre Black Friday by quite a bit here. I also started playing online poker probably roughly around 2007 or 8. How has poker changed to you guys since then? What's the difference now between then and now?
I think the biggest difference, like we started around the same time as well. 2007 was my first year playing online, and at the time nobody really had a clue. Like we were all just guessing. It's pre-solvers, it's pre-training videos, it's pre all that stuff. We had some very rudimentary software that we could sort of like plug in two ranges and figure out what equity they had against each other, but there were no solvers, so everybody was pretty terrible. People kind of, you just had to be not as terrible as everybody else to do very well online. It was a very good time for online, like those first few years, even though I was just starting and didn't really know what I was doing. They were the most profitable years of my career online because the edge relative to the people I was playing against was so good. Then Black Friday comes. That was probably the first big change I remember, because suddenly all the Americans disappeared, and the pool got a lot smaller. Now, initially, it wasn't necessarily a bad thing that the Americans disappeared because most of the best players in the world were American at that time.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Americans were quite a distance ahead of Europe because Europeans learned poker later than Americans, so it had been around for longer in the States. Most of the top regs were Americans at the time.
Okay.
And obviously there was a lot of recreationists as well, but then kind of a double bad thing happened whereby a lot of the regs kind of relocated to Canada or Costa Rica or Mexico or wherever, so they kind of reappeared, but the American regs never came back, so suddenly the pool was a lot tougher. So I remember, in the 6 months to 12 months after Black Friday, just online got a lot tougher. Then, the training videos, the training sites came along. Suddenly it was possible for people to get good fairly quickly if they applied themselves. And then the solvers kind of accelerated that as well. So like for me, the difference between now and then, the biggest difference is back then you kind of learn by playing. You learn by talking to other people who played. You ran spots or hands by each other. There was a lot of emphasis on, being good socially, so that you could form those sort of social bonds where you could talk poker with other good thinking players, and that's how we kind of all improved. But once the solvers came along, and then all the content that's out there now, there's so much content. It's actually possible for somebody to like not know the rules of poker today and actually be very good at poker in 6 months' time if they really throw themselves into it. So in some ways, it's a lot tougher now in the sense that the general standard of play is much tougher and it's harder to beat games. But it's easier in the sense that at least there's lots of good content out there that you can study. And if you really do apply yourself, you can get good. So for me, it's the difference between sort of like having to learn a job on the fly, which is what we all did back in the day. And now it's more like you just have to study it like anything else. It's almost like you do a college course on poker. You study either training videos, books, whatever, or just with the solvers directly yourself, and you can get good very quickly without playing a lot. Whereas we all kind of just learn by playing.
Did you guys? Sorry, go ahead, Wes.
Oh, I was just gonna ask if someone was, relatively new to poker today or had been taking it, been recreational for quite a while, how would you recommend that they go about learning poker the fastest? And we'll say for tournament poker specifically.
There's a lot of good content out there which they can get. Also, if you get a coach that can accelerate it, I think the there's a lot of content out there, but there's a lot of not great content. So you kind of need somebody to steer you in the right direction. It depends on how much time you have as well. Like I do quite a lot of coaching of recreational players, and it's much easier for recreationals to get good very fast now as well, because if they have a basic conceptual framework of the game, which they can get fairly quickly from, reading a book or watching some videos or getting one-to-one coaching, and then they do a bit of work themselves with solvers, they can actually get very good very quickly, in my experience. So I would say and it's different for everybody. Like some people prefer books, and they'll hopefully get one of my books like GTO Poker Simplified or something like that, and that'll be their starting point. Some people prefer training videos. There's lots of training sites out there, and very good training videos. Some people are better with a one-to-one coach. Some people are actually really all they need is just to be shown how to use the solvers, and then off they go. They can kind of do their own thing.
So it's definitely person dependent. That makes sense. David, are you also someone who studies via solvers and things like that, or what kind of learner are you?
So I've never really embraced the doing of the solves myself. Dara will be the first to point out that he's my solver. I run hands by Dara quite often, and he's very kind to actually do the solve. And then we'll talk about it afterwards if I have a particularly tough hand or interesting hand. One thing I did quite quickly adapt to, though, were these sort of trainers. And I've used DTO pretty religiously in the last maybe 5 years. Okay. Maybe it's more than that since it came out, but a long time anyway. I've been using DTO. I do appreciate that GTO Wizard probably is a sort of has more to offer, has more options to offer. But I do particularly like the user interface of DTO. I trust Dominic solves probably over anyone else's. I think he's just like one of the smartest poker minds there ever was. And we'll just kind of feel like I'm interfacing with his sort of system for getting better there. And, there's great DTO sort of disciples, people like Bowie Effect and whatnot, who are sort of proof in the pudding of how good you can get using those kinds of tools. But I am probably overall a bit of a relic of that old time that Dara. I was good conversationally. I was good at creating sort of blackboard ideas for people to talk. I was actually a good coach in the old days. I stopped coaching about maybe 10 or 11 years ago, when Dara and I wound up our stable, because I just didn't really feel like I was at that level that I could offer the sharpest analysis anymore. Whereas I do actually think maybe 14 years ago, my game was much better relatively, even though obviously I'm a better player today, relative to the field. I was better then, and I sort of felt an obligation to be someone who could dispense kind of high level knowledge. And as soon as I felt myself slipping just out of that category, I didn't really feel comfortable coaching anymore. So even though maybe my coaching style was decent, without that sort of, high end knowledge, I didn't feel great about taking on students anymore. And again, I think my strengths were in that sort of conversational time, networking time, maybe where that's where you could kind of do the best. Adapting to solvers has been tough for me, and it was kind of a big gap where my game did deteriorate quite badly, where PO was the new thing and I didn't engage with that. And it was only when the trainers simplified the solver stuff by sort of spitting it at you and creating a much easier interface that I was then able to fully sort of get into the modern paradigm, if you like.
Yeah. I will say my read was absolutely spot on. I am the David Lappin of this podcast. Wes is definitely the Dara. So Wes, and I'm on the same boat, and a lot of our listeners have already heard this story probably a handful of times. But yeah, I'm not as comfortable one-on-one coaching either, strictly because I can't articulate what the solvers would say as well as someone like Wes, just because I don't study them. But a lot of my game is, solver approved because of the studying I do with Wes and running hands by him. It kind of integrates into my system through just chatting with people who are well studied in that. Yeah, I love that we can relate in that way. And you know what? Also, I want to say about that is, I think the fact that you're both separate in that stance balances you two and probably brings a lot more value to your podcast in terms of conversations you have with others and just the way you view poker in general.
Yeah, I'm curious, back 14, 15 years ago, how did you go about coaching then? Did you have, because one thing I've realized is having a big database of hands played can really help see what your tendencies are. So is that how you went about coaching back then, or was it something different?
Yeah, it
Back
kind of
then it
was.
was. Sorry, Dara, go on ahead.
It kind of was because, like as David said, he came out of the stable. Actually, funnily enough, the first time I ever even sort of like engaged with coaching was the very first person that I staked was a young Irish player called Dara, and at the time he was primarily a live player, and I wanted him to start playing online, and I sort of tried to teach him. My idea was just I'll do a brain dump of what I know. I do very well online. He just has to know what I know. But I don't think I was actually great at getting it across at that stage, and I ended up hiring David to coach him. Because as David said, David was a much better coach at the time. Now, when the stable started, actually, that first player that I was coaching, he was one of the four players that was now on the backing side. It was basically me, David, Dara, and an Irish player called Jason Tompkins. And we would have these weekly coaching sessions with the guys that we were staking at the time. And I mean, I'd be the first to admit at the time, I think I was probably the weakest of the four coaches because David had very clear ideas on poker and how it should be played. Dara was kind of similar. Whereas, there was a running joke that my answer to every question was it depends, because
HUD dependent.
Or HUD dependent, yeah, HUD dependent. My game very much relied on sort of like quickly parsing HUD information into go like how does this guy play? How do we play against that? Which is a good way to play. I think I was the strongest player in the group at the time, but I was definitely the weakest coach because just telling somebody it's HUD dependent is not particularly useful. And I do remember that anytime there was a difference of opinion, David's philosophy background would come to the fore, where he was an excellent debater and arguer, and he would win every argument, whether he was right or not. Because just by virtue of the fact that he was a better arguer, he was more confident in his opinion, he was more vehement. And then I remember 2014, 2015, when sort of PO arrived, and I was one of the very early adopters, and we'd be doing a coaching session and David would be ranting about how it has to be played like this, and I'd be running the solve in the background, and I would just come back and say, actually, David, you're wrong. PS says it's completely different. And that was kind of a leap forward for me at the time because I kind of realized I'm actually very good at working with solvers. I'm very good at interpreting why the solvers are saying what they're saying, and that sort of gave me the confidence then to start coaching other people. It's always been solver based. Like I hate when people ask me, what do you think in this spot? I'll say, look, I'll run the solve. I'll explain it to you afterwards. I don't want to give you an opinion because it could very well be wrong. And if it's a wrong opinion, then I'm just reinforcing something which is wrong. I want everything to be checked. Every strategy piece we do on the chip race, I insist on running a solve for it because I don't want to just be one of those things where people give their opinions. That's the way it was back in the day when we were coaching our stable. Four guys giving four opinions, and whoever argued the best was probably going to win. But now, I feel because the solvers are there and you can test your assumptions. You can say, okay, well, these are the ranges. This is how I think my opponent plays. Now the solver will tell you what's the optimal way to play against that player. So yeah, that's kind of been the crucial thing for me. Just the arrival of the solvers was great for me, terrible for David.
Do you when you're discussing solvers, for example, with students, do you explain, or do you have trouble or not trouble explaining, how playing a solver is playing against a perfect opponent, and how a lot of times the opponents they're going to be playing against are, whether it's low stakes or mid stakes, and that it's not going to be primarily how you want to play against them, but maybe using it as a foundation to find exploits to then use against those types of opponents?
Yeah. My basic view, and I always tell students this in the very first session, is that there's three pillars if you want to be a tournament player: GTO, exploits, and ICM. And that's the order that they should be learned in. You need to understand GTO to understand the conceptual framework, why poker works the way it does, why it should work that way if we were all playing perfectly. Um, and then once you understand that and you see people doing something which is different, then you should immediately be thinking, okay, well, they're not playing GTO. How do I exploit that best?
Yeah.
So once we get past the initial sessions where they kind of understand GTO, it's all about exploits. Like we'll set up a spot that they want to look at, and first stage is you run the GTO solve, but then you look at how your opponent is supposed to be playing, and say, like, do you think this is what they're actually doing? Like, are they finding these bluff check raises? Are they finding these? Are they going this far down their value range to check raise? Are they playing more passively? Are they overfolding? Are they maybe underfolding? And then you do a node lock. And the great thing about exploits is, like, people think that exploits are some kind of difficult magic that you have to think. But actually, when you program them into solvers, as soon as you have very clear tendencies, usually it just really simplifies the solution. To take a simple example, like if somebody's over bluffing, then you call all your bluff catchers from the river. You don't have to think about blockers anymore. You don't have to think about anything else. You just think, well, I'm beating all the bluffs. This person's bluffing too much. And suddenly, that whole part of the grid turns green for call. Similarly, if somebody's under bluffing, you don't have to think about blockers either, because they're just not bluffing enough, and you can fold all your bluff catchers. So actually, most of the time, your exploits just really simple, or the other players' tendencies really simplify your strategy. And I think that's the whole objective. Like, nobody can play perfect GTO. It's not even desirable.
Yeah.
Against real life opponents, and it's insanely difficult. Like, nobody's going to get the frequencies right, etc., etc. But when you're playing against real opponents, like, you generally have one thing that you want to do: call, fold, or raise, and you don't have to think about mixing.
We discussed the importance of simplifying a lot on this podcast, and you articulated that perfectly. I think a lot of people are so easily get stuck in their head, or they get too, I don't know, it's just hard for them to simplify it. So, I definitely want to recommend that they check out your podcast to improve their ability to simplify concepts as well as you clearly did there. So, Wes, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. A couple points that stuck out for me. One, it's like, probably the most important part of the solver is seeing how your opponent is supposed to react, and then having a realistic understanding of how they actually will. I almost want, like, I feel like there are so many people who I come across who kind of consider themselves field players. But, my point is always like, okay, let's say you sit down at a table, you have 40 big blinds, you're in the low jack, you have no reads. Do you know what range you're opening? Just to simplify it, it's like, because you can feel all you want, but if you don't know your starting point, you don't know what it means to, widen your range or play tighter.
Great point.
And I think that just expands to every part of the game, flop, turn, river, etc. And yes, I think that's a great way to look at it.
And to pick up on that third pillar that Dara referred to as ICM, which he's also written a book on, understanding what the baseline opens are in whatever seats, and then understanding how ICM is going to twist that range, to be more high card heavy, or at different depths to understand what are the opens. If you have a 20% opening range, but what is the shape of that range and how that can change so much as well. So again, it's, you get so much from the solver learning there because you understand what they will do. And then obviously, even if you want to widen that because you feel like people won't 3-bet enough or whatever it happens to be as your exploit, it's like, what way do you widen it? Do you widen it to have all the high card hands, or do you widen it to incorporate some suited connectors, or do you let a few more smaller pairs creep in? Like, how do you do it? And again, that's like the big leap, if you like, in a lot of people's game, is when they finally, reason with that.
Can grasp that. Yeah, I completely agree. Can we, let's take a moment and talk about the Chip Race podcast. So doing a little bit of research for this podcast, and I've listened to a couple of episodes over the time. I will say that I am thoroughly impressed by the amount of professional guests you've had on. If you guys want to, I mean, pretty much all of the big names from what I've seen you've had on discussed. Let's ask this. First off, how has the level of guests, I mean, they're the top tier guests, how have they improved your game? And yeah, I guess let's start there. What does that look like for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, we've been very lucky. Obviously, in every show we have what we call the strategy segment, and we always try to have a guest on for that. Sometimes we can't find one; it's just me and David talking about how one of us played.
Same.
But for the most part, we do try and get in a guest, and like some of them have been just incredible. Like we've had Petrangelo, we've had Patrick Leonard, Jason Kuhn, Dan Morris, Chidwick, all these guys. So you just get an insane level and an insane insight to their level of play, and the way they're thinking about the game, that's definitely helped. I mean, generally, the level of guest. Well, let's say when we started, we were a regional Irish podcast. We only had Irish poker players on. They were the people that we interviewed. Then when we came back in our second iteration, after about 18 months away, because we'd gotten a sponsorship deal and they wanted us to bring the podcast back. But funnily enough, they had no license in Ireland at the time. So they said, well, you can't have Irish guests on. That just serves no purpose to us. So we kind of had to start. Yeah, we had to start shaking the trees, and it was really difficult at the start because like no one knew who we were, and it was difficult to get people. So it happened in basically in degrees. There was a couple of leap forwards. Let's say we were friends with Jake Cody. Once we got Jake, we could get sort of other big name English people because they look at the list of former guests and see Jake Cody and go, okay, well if Jake thought it was worth his while, then I guess it's worth her time. And then on the American front, we were very lucky that I was friends with Jennifer Tilley. And she agreed to come on, and she actually got us other guests too, like Phil Lack and Esfandiari and so on.
Awesome.
So that really helped us on that front. So it was kind of just a rolling ball where we were getting bigger and bigger names, and then that sort of emboldened us to ask, somebody like Phil Hellmuth, do you want to come on? And of course, the first thing Phil Hellmuth does is he looks at all the people who've already been on, and if it's a pile of Irish and English names he's never heard of, you're not going to hear from him. But if it's like Jennifer Tilley and Esfandiari and other people that he obviously rates, he's much more likely to say yes. So yeah, we were lucky on that front, but we were always very strategic as well. David could probably talk more about this because he's the producer of the show. But one thing we've always tried to do is sort of balance the different demographics in poker. So we'll rarely have two American guests on. Okay. We try to balance across demographics of like American versus European, live versus online, cash versus tournament, male versus female, all that stuff, so that we don't have just the same type of guest on every time.
Let me ask you, before coming on this pod, did you guys look through our list and say, just kidding?
No, not to be honest, what I would say on that is, I did look at your list and I saw Ite and I see that Ash is on this week, and some people that I know, and actually we've never had Ite on. I would love to get her on at some point ourselves.
Incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great discussion.
But what I would say is, as people who are on the other side of the mic, so to speak, so many people, like we've literally between our two shows, we've probably done something in the region of 550 interviews.
Okay. Oh,
and
wow.
Whether that's strategy or topical or a minor interview, for want of a better phrase, or a big name guest interview or whatever it would be, or then our lock-in show where the person comes on and sort of talks topical with us for maybe half an hour, 40 minutes. Across all of those kinds of shows and all those kinds of segments, and there are hundreds of them, obviously we've had to call in favors, or people have had to, give up their time to be on our show, regardless of whether they felt like they would get, maybe they get some promotional value out of it. Maybe they just want to be one of the many guests who've been on the chip race, whatever it happens to be. But, it would be very rich of us to turn down a podcast offer now and not give up half an hour of our time, given how many people have done that for us. Also, I think we're just very big supporters of other people in the space. Obviously, when we got into podcasting, Andrew Brokos was the king.
Thinking Poker, right?
Was the show that had been on for a few years already, and we hold Andrew in very high esteem and thought that was a great show. At the same time, Joe Ingram was doing something a little bit different with his kind of endless, nameless sort of 5-hour podcasts with the same 7 guests over and over again. Love Joey, obviously love what he does, but it was very different, and I think we wanted to be a bit of an antidote to that. We came up with the idea very early on of having this variety show idea, 4 or 5 guests on an episode, all different
awesome.
kinds of segments, and just felt like that was the way to sort of give a little bit of love or shine a light onto all aspects of the poker world. And we've stuck very, very militantly to that formula, even as our, for want of a better phrase, notoriety of guest list has gotten higher and higher and higher, to the point that almost nobody wouldn't do the show now, which is lovely. We still want to stay true to those, let me put it this way. We could do an episode where we just put out 4 high rollers every week. But that wouldn't be the show. That wouldn't be the chip race in our mind. It has to have that balance that Dara described. And we are very, very careful about how we always try to give a little bit of love to all the demographics he mentioned there over the course of maybe a 5 or 6 episode span. Obviously, you can't do it all in one episode, but you're kind of keeping an eye on all of that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for taking the time to be on here. We greatly appreciate that as well. Sorry, go ahead, Robert.
Yes, similar to what David said, like I never check who was on before. First of all, I don't think that I'm a big enough deal that I would look at a list of people I've heard of and go, well, I don't belong on this podcast, because I think most people won't have heard of me either. But secondly, like David said, like we do like to support other podcasts. We remember how really difficult it was at the start. Once we'd run out of our immediate friends, we were like, who the hell are we going to be able to get now? We can't keep having the same 4 people on over and over again. So I think I've probably been a first guest on more podcasts, or at least in the first few shows, than almost any other person, because I just don't say no to anybody. And sometimes it's led to some comical situations. There was one guy, I'm not going to say his name for obvious reasons, but I realized at some point that there actually was no podcast. I was just giving him free coaching.
Oh no!
Yeah. I remember I asked him once, so where does this go up? Is there like a link or something? And it was like, and he wasn't able to find.
Wow, that's that's a swindle right there.
Yeah. Dara's actually tapped into both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness there. And I understood this very early on in my relationship with Dara, was that Dara is just going to say, yeah, let's do that, to almost any suggestion. Will we go for sushi tonight? Yeah, let's do that.
Yes, man. I can appreciate that, though.
Yes, man, in the loveliest way, that he would just sort of, go with the flow. But in that sense, I always thought, oh, it's my job now to protect Dara from all the people who try to take advantage of this nice quality of his. And so when he's in a poker room, particularly if it's in Ireland or the UK, and he's genuinely one of the most famous poker players in that part of the world, and obviously is very well known, despite his pathetic attempts at being humble there a moment ago, is very well known all around. But if he's in the UK or Ireland specifically, the minute that 15-minute break starts, 7 people from different corners of the room come at him to tell them the hand that they just played, or a hand they played online a week ago. And I would just sort of beeline to sort of block them. And I would go, leave the man alone. Let him have a 15-minute break. And then they'd all be scared of me and they'd walk away. And then I'd say, okay, so Dara, I had this hand there a few minutes ago. Can you help me with my hand now?
Get in there and save him a little bit. I like
the
that.
Attention back. Yeah,
it's funny how you mentioned going back to kind of having your first kind of bigger name guests on, and how that pushed you guys to start getting bigger name guests. The same thing was for us. We are from the Midwest. We're from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and We started off with a lot of the bigger names in the Midwest. The Josh Reicherts. If you're not familiar with him, I think he's one of the top circuit ring winners. Sorry, Wes.
It just so happened our first guest, Ian Matakis, happened to be someone we were friends with, but he had just come off a World Series of Poker Player of the Year.
Yeah. So our one of our good friends won Player of the Year, so just killed it. But and then all of a sudden, it was as simple as reaching out to Chance Cornuth, and he was like, yeah, I'd come on the podcast. And then boom, we got Lucky Chewy, and we get all these other names. And it's like, I'm thankful that, but also like you guys, I would love to help give other people who want to be a part of this space an opportunity to do that as well. So, but yeah, thank you guys for taking the time to be here with that. I kind of wanted to...
And actually, and one more thing on that is that what we've noticed in our time, 10 years on the air, whatever it's been, is that podcasts come and go. Obviously, Dara calls it pod fade, where very few of them get past their 7th episode. And if they do, there's actually a good chance that they'll go on and actually have a show. But a lot of people sort of have the idea or think that they could do it, don't realize how much work I think is involved in it, and then fall away not too soon after. But the thing we've noticed actually is a lot of the established podcasts in the last maybe 2 or 3 years have fallen away. And that's not great to see, because obviously we want the podcast space to be healthy. I think a few of those people, it is an awful lot of hard work. Maybe the day is going to come. When it comes, I don't know, but the day is going to come where we decide, do you know what, it's a big use of our time, and we've really done what we set out to do with this show, and maybe we call it quits. I hope that's still a long way off, but at some point that'll happen to us too. But I think a lot of the established ones just fell away around the same time in the last couple of years. And maybe not so many have come into the space, contrary to the great joke that everyone has podcasts. Actually, I don't think there's a huge amount of podcasts in the poker space.
I agree with that.
I think that was helpful for us. Like there's not really a Midwest poker podcast. Like we sort of had a market where we were able to, and it's certainly not a huge podcast, and we've grown, but like we started off, I remember we were kind of surprised by, how many listens we were getting right off of the bat.
I think so. The only people we that were in the space with us was the Rec Poker Crew, which you guys have had Jim Reed on, and instead of like making it be a competition, we just collaborated with each other. You know what I mean? And that it's better that way anyway. So, but yeah.
No, those guys are great. And actually, just because it's breaking news right now, it may not be breaking news by the time you put this out. But literally a few moments ago, we found out that the GPI awards are no longer going to be a thing, and maybe someone else will take up that mantle. But in the years that they ran their Global Poker Awards, we obviously did very well. We were nominated 5 of the 6 years. We won 3 of those years.
Congrats, guys.
And that was a huge promotional tool for us to kind of push our names into a wider audience. Sure. And certainly we got bumps at various different times when we got the notoriety around the awards. Obviously, awards are kind of silly. I think everybody should really accept that idea. But nonetheless, anything like that does shine a spotlight and does help up-and-coming content creators. And I want to give if I have the opportunity, a shout out to Eric Denny and Hans and all his team at GPI for all the hard work they did, mostly thankless, mostly criticized every which way for how Daniel Negreanu didn't get enough nominations this year, or someone else didn't, or Doug Polk wasn't in the right category, or whatever it happened to be. But they put so much time and effort in, and even if they didn't get every single award category right every single year, their motivation was to try to support content creators in all the spaces in poker. And we certainly, within the podcast space, got a lot out of that.
I'm sorry to hear that as well. I had no idea that, like you said, is breaking news. I hadn't heard yet. And I enjoyed following along with the kind of, that's exactly how I learned of a bunch of creators, as well as by seeing who won those awards. So, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you guys had gotten, what you said, 5 nominations and 3 wins.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And you guys get trophies for that too, right? We love the hard way around here.
Yeah. Dara's actually won other awards. Dara won the book prize last year as well, up in a very tough category, it must be said. But I think the jury, who are basically like hundreds of people in the media and players in different parts of the industry who are his peers, I think quite rightly decided Dara's 6 books with Barry deserved an award. And even if, and the one particular award book that was up that year was the one that won and beat out quite stiff competition. So Dara's much more decorated than I.
I really want to. We will actually take the time to discuss those books. I'd like to introduce those to our audience as well. But before we do, I kind of want to start a little battle here. We've been talking about collaboration, not a battle with you guys, but Europeans versus Americans. So, as an American going to the World Series of Poker every summer, I align with the European thought that kind of the Americans are the fish. As much as I want to say that, they seem to be the softer spots. But you said, I believe it was Dara who mentioned, prior to solvers and stuff like that, it was the other way around. Why do you think that transition happened where Europeans kind of became the top players? And I guess, why is that? Do you think? What made that happen?
It really goes back to Black Friday. At the time, a very large, I think about 40% of the players who played online in the world were American. So it was by far the biggest block. And then the European countries had actually started playing poker later. Now, Ireland was actually the first country in Europe to start playing poker on a fairly wide scale. It happened in the 80s, but in most European countries before 2000, there's almost no poker. Almost no, the Germans didn't really start until around the time that we started playing, and that was driven by online. And the Americans, because there was such a rich tradition, it's the American game. Just the American players were better. They had more reps, they played more hands online, etc., etc. And then Black Friday happens, and suddenly they kind of disappear from the pool, and they just kind of go backwards at a time when the Europeans are actually catching up because they're playing more and more.
Yeah.
And like literally year on year, you could see it at the WSOP. Oh, I remember the first time I went to the WSOP. If there was a non-English speaking European at the table, a young guy, you thought, brilliant, this guy's going to be a total and utter fish.
Yeah.
And if there was a young American guy, you were like, oh no, this definitely isn't good. But that completely changed by say 2015, because now it's flipped around. If there's a young European guy, he's traveled over, he's almost certainly an online player, he's almost certainly working and studying very hard, and he's going to be probably the best player at the table. If there's a young American guy there the same age, he probably came of age after Black Friday, so he's never played online, or maybe just to a very limited degree on the sites that still take Americans. So he just doesn't have the same experience, and his standard just is lower as a result. And year on year, you could kind of see that gap growing. Now, I think it actually has come back a little bit in recent years, because more and more
models.
Yeah, more and more of the American recreationals, I
Seriously.
think, are actually studying now. They're using solvers. Maybe they're signed up to training sites as well. And like I play seniors tournaments, and you hear seniors, the level of strat talk now compared to when I started playing seniors 10 years ago, it's just chalk and cheese. Now you have guys talking about, well, I had the right blocker to make that check raise or whatever. Because these guys are studying with the actual, with a lot of the American training sites like Jacka Coaching, Chip Leader Coaching, all of those. So I think the American recreational has improved again. But then it's also part of it is just the travel as well. Like if you travel to America to play poker, you're probably one of the better players, even if you're a recreational, because you're going to that effort. The guy who's there already probably won't be so good. Similarly, the Americans travel to the Irish Open. They're all going to be better than average because they've made the effort of crossing an ocean to play this tournament.
I'm willing to bet the number is far different. I'm assuming a lot less Americans will go over there than Europeans will come over here. I don't know. The only reason I say that, and I might be completely wrong, is because I don't know anybody who goes over there to play that stuff. However, I've heard so many incredible things about the Irish Poker Open. I would love for that, but I don't know if maybe it's just a lesser number of professionals. I guess I don't know what the reason is truly, but I do agree.
Well, I think to be fair, like you guys have a very big, vibrant circuit anyway, so there's no real reason for people to travel. There's you guys have so many local tours.
That makes sense.
Whereas, for us, it's still a big deal to go to the WSOP or to WPT World Championship or whatever. Even though we obviously have local tours here as well. I think America is just better served by their local tours.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you think there's a larger percentage of players in America that are recreationals, or is that because that's kind of how I feel, but maybe that's just because the World Series happens here and it's, easier for them to travel to?
I think there definitely is. I think the reason for that is poker's on TV. You go into a sports bar, and if the basketball or American football's not on, there's reruns of World Series or
Sure.
WPT or whatever there is. It's much more in the consciousness. We had little tastes of that in Europe when Poker Stars were doing a big push with Channel 4 in the UK and Ireland to have, I think it was maybe like a 10 p.m. show covering the UK IPT for a while. There will be the occasional show that will feature poker. There was a BBC documentary, an excellent one a couple of years ago, about a couple of Scottish poker players, Neil Farrell and David Doherty, and their sort of travails over a year. But it's very few and far between to see poker penetrate the mainstream. And normally, if you do in our news media, it's because of some scummy like cheating scandal. Like it doesn't penetrate in that like nice positive way of watching people play poker, loving the game, winning big sums of money on final tables. It's just not part of our sort of TV. It's never on in the pub. And I think that makes a big difference. Also, it is the American pastime. You guys play it with your family. Like more Americans know the rules of poker for sure, and could at least follow, how a hand is played over a Thanksgiving, even if they never play poker apart from that. Then if you introduce the idea of let's play Texas Hold'em to the vast majority of Irish families, they'd be like, okay, what are the rules? I have no idea how this works.
Okay.
Yeah, just a quick point on that, on there not being poker on TV. Like there used to be a lot of poker on TV here as well, but Black Friday changed everything because the poker was driven by the online sites that sponsored it because they wanted people to get people playing online. Now, poker at the time was growing in Europe, and they were just trying to move people online. But also, obviously, most of the market was still in the US. 40% of the players were in the US. So once Black Friday happened and that entire market disappeared, and they already kind of had everybody who was going to play online poker already playing, the online sites saw no reason anymore to pay sites to cover, EPTs, or the Irish Open used to be on TV every single year.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
People kind of forget that. Like I did commentary, I think maybe on the last ever Irish Open that was on TV, which was around 2018. But David's right. These days you just don't see poker on TV because the sponsors and the advertisers are not there.
If Americans were to come over across the pond and play poker over there, what events would you recommend they play? I mean, would it be the Irish Open? Would it be an EPT event? What do you think?
It would obviously depend on their buy-in level of comfort. But I think, if you're going to do a trip of that nature, you're probably at least playing a 1K main event, or else why are you paying £1,000 for your flight?
Agreed.
I would say yes. I would say Irish Open would be an absolute must. Firstly, Ireland's closer than anywhere else in Europe, so it's a shorter journey. But also, I think, the love of poker in that room is something very, very special. And credit to JP and Paul, who took it over a decade or so ago now to sort of reinvent it. It used to be a slightly higher buy-in, smaller field, full of regs and strongest players, kind of an elite thing, and they've kind of made it a tournament for the people now at the kind of 1100 price point. And I certainly would recommend it above maybe everything else. But Prague is coming up in a few weeks' time. It's one of the most beautiful cities. WPT go to Madrid. I think Stars go to Barcelona for the last 20 years. That's certainly a highlight for a lot of people. Dara, you actually saw quite a few Canadians and Americans come to some of the Irish Poker Tour events, which are smaller buy-ins. So it's nice to see a bit of that as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Like, it depends on your buying level because obviously we saw Jim Reed, for example, at the Irish Open. But we do see Americans at some of the smaller buy-in events too, like the main event at the International Poker Open, the so-called IPO. That got a few Americans across, and that's like a 300 or 400 buy-in, I think. There's a lot of tournaments at the level. There's another very good festival usually in February, the Dublin Poker Festival, that includes the European Deep Stack, which is kind of a similar buy-in level. And the Irish festivals tend to be very good because there's always a lot of side events. You can basically just choose yourself. The same festival will have €100 side events and a 2K high roller.
Plenty of options then.
Plenty of options, yeah. So, something for everybody. And then the Irish Poker Tour, which has been a massive success in Ireland, like that runs 20 stops a year, all around the country. Some of them are some particular highlights. Killarney is always regarded as a highlight in the Irish calendar. It's just a beautiful place to be, beautiful town, and did see some Americans and Canadians there this year. And Galway, which is coming up in January, is another highlight. in Europe generally, like the EPT events are very well run. Stars events in general are always very very well run. Obviously, they're rivals to our sponsors, so we
Oh,
probably shouldn't say too many nice things about
yeah.
them. But yeah, but they do, but they do an absolutely amazing job. But to be honest, like we are starting to be spoiled for choice here in Europe too,
I'm
because
glad to
there are.
hear that, and I'm excited too for you guys because I get the opportunity to watch a lot of these events now with the with live streams and a lot of these events being live streamed, the EPTs, the Irish Poker Opens, and I get to enjoy them. It actually brings me back to a memory I had. I don't know, this is probably 10 years ago. And forgive me for not remembering his name. Is it O'Shea? Is that right?
John O'Shea?
I think so. And his son final table domain, if I remember
Oh,
correctly.
OD.
OD.
Yeah,
OD.
and
John
I,
McCall. Yeah.
yeah, and I just remember, I think it was him. If and correct me if I'm wrong. Where it didn't like, didn't you get like extremely slow rolled by some guy who flopped the nut flush, and then he
Yeah,
like,
David was actually doing commentary on that. If you listen to that
oh
clip,
really? That was
that goes
David on
viral.
there. Oh, that's
David was actually
incredible.
doing the commentary on it at the time. He
Oh
kind of cheated
man.
because he knew it was coming, but
Oh yeah.
Oh.
No, 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 no.
Oh man,
um,
that was just
but
justice at its finest. I love that because he ended up
that,
hitting a boat, right?
yeah, that will end up being one of the most famous hands in poker, even 50 years from now, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But to pick up on one thing Dara said there about just poker in Ireland, and I think you were very interested in poker in Ireland, and obviously Irish Open, Dublin Poker Festival, and IPO are maybe the three festivals that stand out the most for us. Is that there's a unique thing, or maybe almost unique thing, which is that you can basically host a poker event in a hotel ballroom, in a convention center in Ireland. You can move a license into another kind of space, which you can't do if you go to other countries in Europe. You have to be in casinos or attached to casinos in a very obvious way. Whereas in Ireland, actually, those licenses are a little bit mobile, which mostly means you end up in function rooms in hotels. So you end up in bar atmospheres, no slot machines, no horrible noises, no
That's
blackjack, no
great.
horrible
Yeah.
temptation. It's a poker event that's just poker. You go to the RGS for the big event coming up in the Easter weekend, and it will be a monstrously large room. You will be immediately taken aback by just how huge the event is, but you will not see one blackjack table, one roulette table, one, slot machine. It is just poker. There's a bar, and there'll definitely be plenty of drinking,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
there'll
yeah.
be singing and dancing going on in all parts of the place, but there won't be that sort of other temptation that obviously does take people away from what we love, which is the playing of poker.
I think we could really benefit from being able to do something like that here in the States as well, because everything is you have to walk past blackjack tables, craps, all that stuff to be able to go into the tournament room. And
Yeah, I mean, even the World Series, you have to walk. There's so much smoke in that horseshoe hallway. It's
Oh.
just
yeah, it's for sure.
worst.
lung cancer alley we call it. Yeah, when you
Lung,
walk those
lung
two rooms.
cancer
Yeah.
alley. Yeah, for sure. Let's go ahead and jump to Dara, your books. You've published 6 books, is that correct?
Yeah, 6 books and 1 ebook. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm the one I'm most familiar with, and I would like for you to kind of tell us about all of them, but I think is it your newest one? Is that the one I've heard of the most? Is the
Is it the satellite one?
the satellite one?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that was actually the first one. Yeah.
That was the
Uh,
first one. Okay.
Yeah, basically what happened was Barry Carter, who co-wrote The Mental Game of Poker with Jared Tender, which I think is
One of the
probably
first books I read.
yeah, I think it's the best-selling poker book of all time, or it's certainly up there. So he had written those books, and then Barry's a full-time writer. This was in the days before he became the meme lord, but he was a full-time writer for a company called Poker Strategy, and for them he wrote an article. He wrote a feature on I think it was something like 10 poker books that have never been written that should be written, and one of them was a book on satellites. And a couple of years later, he reread the piece and he realized there still hadn't been really a book on satellites. So he did some research, asked a few people who they thought the best satellite player in the world was at the time, and at the time that they were very much my specialization, and I was doing very very well in satellite. So I think a bunch of people said to him that I was the best. So he came and asked me if I'd be interested in writing a book. Now at the time I was kind of transitioning away from satellites, so I thought, okay, yeah, this is good. I'll write a book, tell everybody how to play satellites, and then I won't have to worry about them getting tougher because I won't be playing them anymore because they were the ecosystem was changing online, let's say. So I wrote the book with Barry. Barry kept my expectations very low, told me most poker books don't sell more than a couple of hundred copies. Uh, and I was like, yeah, well, I'm not doing this just for the sales. It was an interesting project to me to try and
Passion, yeah.
write it, right? Yeah. And I wanted to write I wanted the book to be as absolutely good as it was, like common, as it could be. A common reaction from my friends afterwards when the book came out, particularly the other guys who played Satellites, was, what on earth are you doing? You've literally put everything into that book. Now we don't have any secrets anymore. But that's kind of the point. Like, I would never feel right about writing a book and just giving away 10% or 20% of what I know. Because, if somebody takes the time to read a book, to buy a book, I think they deserve the best effort you can make. So the book did phenomenally well, much, much better than we expected in terms of sales. It was a great experience as well working with Barry. He's a very fun guy to work with. And it was kind of a good relationship. Like, he's good at the stuff that I'm not good at, like marketing, and he would, churn out the first draft. So all the stuff that I didn't really want to do, he was quite happy to do. And he also kind of served the role of the recreational player, which I think was super important, because instead of me just kind of writing what I thought was the strategy, I would have to explain it to him, and he often wouldn't understand it at first. And he'd go away and write a first draft that was wrong, and I'd have to explain it better and so on. So it was kind of an iterative process, but it meant that it was ultimately the book was pitched at the right level for recreational players to learn. So because the book did so well, Barry said, "Why don't we do another one?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know what else we could write about." But at the time, I was transitioning into playing more and more PKOs online, progressive
Okay.
knockouts.
Mhm.
And I was doing my own study. I didn't really know too much about them, but I was working out the strategy as I went on what the strategic differences were. So, as a kind of byproduct of that, I said, okay, let's write a book on PKOs. So I'll put everything that I've learned in the last year or so since I transitioned in solvers, we put into the PKO book, and then that book did very well. Again, we enjoyed it. We enjoyed the process. So Barry was like, let's do a third book. The other thing apart from Satellites that I was probably famous for understanding better than most people was ICM. Um, so we specifically wrote a book on ICM, and then the fourth book was we basically, people used to ask me, how do I learn GTO? And I would recommend either Andrew Brokos's two books on optimal poker, or Michael Acevedo's amazing book, Modern Poker Theory. But often, if it was a recreational player, they'd come back and say, "Yeah, I read those two books, but I didn't really understand them." Uh, so I kind of realized, okay, they're not pitched at quite the right level for sort of the recreational, let's say. So another book needs to be written. So we came up with the idea of writing GTO Poker Simplified, and the whole idea was to simplify it down to the point where people sort of like got the major concepts, and then if they were really into it, they could go and read Michael's book or Andrew's two books, and sort of delve into it more. So we wrote GTO Poker Simplified, and that's actually been our biggest seller, much to our shock, because
Okay.
it was a book we didn't think needed to be written, and it was only written basically because people kept coming to me and saying they couldn't understand the other books. And then, Mystery Bounties came on the scene. I kind of put a lot of study into Mystery Bounties and how they changed the strategy. So the fifth book was on Mystery Bounties, and then the sixth book, the one that actually won the GPI award, was, we call it Beyond GTO, which was basically using solvers to identify exploits, which is something which came naturally out of my coaching. As I mentioned earlier, like when I'm coaching people, I teach them GTO first, but then that's once that's out of the way, it's all about the exploits.
Okay.
Mhm.
I mean, thank you for, for all the work you've done with that and allowing, amateurs to improve their game by reading your content in your books. And that's awesome. If you wouldn't mind, send me a DM with the links to those, and I'd gladly put those in the show notes for our listeners
Absolutely.
to
Thanks a
check
lot. Yeah,
out.
no, really appreciate that.
Absolutely, we'll do that. Let's Wes, did you have something to say before?
Oh, I mean, I was going to kind of move over to strategy, kind of
Yeah,
on a
great.
similar topic of the book. So, like, I think in terms of our listeners, I think the most common type of player is like a mostly live tournament, recreational, maybe aspiring to be professional or just to get better. And then I'm sure a lot of them play satellites to try and get into the, 1100s around here and stuff. So, and I mean, Max, you and I both know that like in these satellites, there's probably a ton of just very basic mistakes being made.
They
So
seem
in
very
terms of,
soft for sure.
yeah, so what would you say in terms of satellites? What are some of the biggest mistakes that you see amongst recreationals, and what could you say in a couple minutes to give them a better understanding of how they should be attacking those?
Yeah, I mean, basically the thing with a satellite, assuming it's a super satellite with more than one prize, is that you're
Mhm.
you're not playing for first place. You're playing for whatever number of seats. If there's like 6 seats, you're playing for sixth. The more it, to, in a normal tournament to come first, you have to take a riskier approach than if you're just aiming for sixth. But if you're just aiming for sixth, you take a much lower risk, lower variance approach. You also have to realize the point at which you're sort of like you're there already, even though the satellite isn't over. Now there
Mhm.
is obviously the new type of satellite that has
Yeah.
various names like targets and landmarks or milestones,
Yeah.
where you do actually get your seat early if you hit that
Mhm.
milestone. But assuming we're still talking about the old-fashioned ones, like I saw this last night. I played in an Irish Open satellite last night. There was 3 seats, and it was the first Irish Open satellite I played. 3 seats, and there was a cash prize for fourth. Now, with 5 people left, chip leader at half the chips. Uh, so my first tip is when you're chip leader with half the chips, you do not need to be risking very many chips. You should just be
Folding.
either sitting out or just maintaining. So there was one hand where he opened under the gun and somebody shoved 21 big blinds and he called off ace 10 off.
Oh,
Found himself in a completely unnecessary flip, lost the flip. Now, guess what? He's back in the pack with the rest of us. He's gone from a spot where he's almost locked up to get a seat to now he's in real trouble. Um, then later on, the same player, it worked out for him on this occasion. Now we're down to four, so the cash prize is guaranteed to everybody, but we're still playing for the seat, which
Yeah.
is worth a lot more. And blind on blind, he raised called Ace King. Now he was obviously ahead. He was ahead of Jack Seven suited, but Jack Seven suited is going to win a
40%.
lot of the time there.
Yeah.
And again, like he was chip leader in a spot where he just had no reason to get involved. And you see that that's probably the biggest mistake I see. People getting involved when they don't need to get involved.
I
mhm.
completely agree. That actually reminds me of the global poker winter, whatever, the 99 buy-in from last winter. I had pocket aces with 1.5 big blinds, and we are on the stone bubble, and there was 3 people shorter than me. So I just folded them, and I ended up turning that into 10K. So I mean, it's simple. Like you just have to understand that it doesn't matter if you have pocket aces. The fact what we're trying to win is to get into the tournament. We have that locked up by just folding. So yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the concept of in this example, third place is the exact same thing as first place. Like third place is first place.
Yeah.
I,
Um,
I assume you got the ticket or
I
the
did, yeah, yeah. The ace
congratulations.
king who barely covered the other guy held.
yeah.
But to be honest, I was so happy because I was actually the shortest of the four, but I
Oh,
had 23 big blinds. But even if the
oh,
other
you
guy
guys
had
are
won,
deep actually.
yeah, even if the other guy had won, he was going to be the ace king was going to be down to like 3 big blinds. So I was
Okay.
once I saw the 2 hands, I was like, "Oh, this is amazing! Just please don't run out straight at the
Yes,
board or something."
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah, and I mean that was literally the very first conversation I had about Barry with satellites. It's funny how little things change. Barry said, "What's the biggest mistake?" and I identified that, and that's why on the cover of Poker Satellite Strategy we have a picture of somebody folding aces because, as you found out, there are spots where you fold aces because
Yeah,
there's no upside. There's
there was
literally
none.
no upside.
Yeah, but people simply might just overlook that. They're like, I have aces, I have 1.5 big blinds. But if you look at how many people are shorter than you and only one person needs to bust, like it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Also, bizarrely, some people sometimes get very emotional about it. They're like, "Well, I didn't come here to fold aces. This is disgrace." But like, that's the game. I'm sorry, you entered a satellite. That is the game. Don't come moaning to me when your aces get busted by 6-4. You weren't unlucky. You were just stupid in a spot where you didn't need to. But yeah, people don't like folding. So
That's
um,
Yeah.
that's fair.
No, and I don't play too many satellites, but is there, one thing I realized 'cause I'll play a bunch of online satellites when I'm out in Vegas. And one thing I realized is I found myself in a spot where I was like the shortest stack. And maybe we were on the bubble. I think maybe two, on the cash bubble and then one more to actually get the seat. But I realized like, these players seem good. So now suddenly I can get a lot of jams through because they really shouldn't be calling me. So I realized like, oh, I can actually accumulate chips quite well here. So how does that dynamic work if you have people who
Yeah,
know
no,
what they need?
it's so important to recognize that, and a lot of when you're playing in mixed fields in particular, like it's identifying who's good enough to know that they should be folding because they're locked
Mhm.
up, and who isn't, and whose stack can I hurt? You know, I might only have eight big blinds, but if I'm shoving into a guy who has 14 or 15, I can do him a lot of damage. But if I'm shoving into a guy who's got 60 and just wants the satellite to be over, it's a completely different situation. So the ranges change so much in those spots. And it's one of the few times in poker where you want to be out of position to the best player on the table
Mhm.
because you want your shoves to get through. I have the perfect story to illustrate this. A couple of years ago, I was at the Aussie Millions and I was playing a satellite for the main event. And we were on the actual bubble. There's 20 seats and 21 left, and I was one of the shortest. And to my immediate left, I had Antoine Sou, the great French player who's made
Yep.
the WSP main event final table twice.
Yep.
And it was just an amazing spot for me because I knew I could shove any two, and he was going to fold aces. And we played this kind of charade for a while where it would fold around to me. I would pretend to look at my cards. I didn't actually look at them because I didn't want to see 3-2 off and still have to shove. So I would
Yeah.
pretend, and then I would shove, and he would pretend to look at his cards and then pretend to think and then fold. And then after this happened 3 or 4 times, he kind of laughed and joked to me like, "We both know what's going on here. Why are we pretending to look at our cards?"
Yeah.
Which was unfortunate because the Aussie recreationals at the table now thought the €2 were colluding.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I also have a good one. I remember, and this is a long time ago, in a satellite for a UK IPT, a friend of mine telling me a bad beat of how, you know, he grinded his way into this spot, and he was in one of these situations where you can shove any two from a blind v blind sort of situation. He shoved any two, and he's called by ace king to his surprise by the big blind, and he's shocked and horrified. Now he loses, and now he bubbles. And keeps going on about how the guy misplayed his hand and I did nothing wrong. I'm allowed to shove any two, and this guy fucked up. And I said, no, you actually fucked up because if you know how to play satellites live properly, and I mean properly because there's loads of soft edges in this, what you
Mhm.
do is you teach the guy to your immediate left 15 from the money why he has to fold everything in those situations. You explain the concept to him, you make it starkly clear how ridiculous he has to fold aces and kings and all these hands that he would never do, to the point that he fucking understands it, and then you do it, and then you know you'll get it through.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And by the way, David, congrats on your run within the last couple of weeks. What was it? The Scandinavian Poker Championship?
It's had a very highfalutin name, and this is a thank you very much. First of all, it's always nice to technically chop a tournament, win a tournament, but it's very important to point out that the very illustrious sounding Scandinavian Open Poker Championship was a €270 event,
Yeah.
with maybe 800 runners, that
pile.
ultimately got down to a final table with a 7 big blind average.
Oh,
I mean,
my.
that's
And how many people were in the chop, David?
I had 6 big blinds, and 8 ways there was a suggestion of a deal. What I understood was in 2 hands, the big blind was going to take a third of my chips. And I
Yeah,
thought,
that makes
not
sense.
bad having this seat and getting the deal through now. And I let the sort of deal talks commence, and everyone agreed to their number. And everyone was almost like at the point of applauding and high-fiving. And I went, I'm not happy with my number.
okay.
And the chip leader turned to me, and this is in no way an exaggeration. He turned to me, he grabbed his bag, he said, how much do you want then? How much do you want? I just want to go to bed. Take whatever you want.
Wow.
At the point I said, well, I'll have your 18 grand that you're being given. You can have my 9.5 if you want. And he's like, no, seriously, what do you really want? And I said, I think about 11 would be fair. And he said, fine, just take it out of my bag. You can have the bag as well. Just have it. I just want to go to sleep.
Can
I'm
have the
delirious
bag
and
as well.
tired. It was 6:30 in the morning. He was like well over it. And I went, well, if you give me enough to make it 11, everyone else has obviously agreed to their number. So if nobody has an objection, we can do that. And he said, fine. And everyone got the deal through. So I was in an 8-way chop.
That's a huge ROI. And
Impressive.
also, let me say that people can have their opinions on chops, but when you're 6 or 7 big blinds deep, the variance is just going to be way too high for you to do anything that's within your control. So to be able to lock up whatever third place money or whatever you got without having to, double up 2 or 3 times is absolutely massive for you.
Now, I would say two things. Firstly, it was 6:30 a.m. and I was commentating on the final table at 1 p.m. later that day.
Okay.
So I was prioritizing getting at least 4 hours sleep. Secondly, I would disagree with you on one point there,
Please.
which is actually there's an awful lot of skill in playing 5, 6, 3, 2 big blinds, half a big blind. That very few people understand properly. Dara and I used to joke because years ago we were probably the 2 best players in the 3x pool on Stars, which invariably turned into a 3 big blind game. And we used to say we're probably the 2 best 3 big blind players in the world because we understood, how eking out an eighth of a big blind in this spot was worth something. Eking that people make really bad short stack mistakes, kind of as big as they like. There was guys at that final table were going to make more than a buy-in mistake, by just not calling the right hand that they're meant to call with, or not understanding the extremity of the ICM and feeling like they had to flick in the call for 3 bigs when the guy shoved. And if that 3 bigs is like half his remaining stack, that was absolutely never a call. But they'll do it because they just go, oh, well, I have any 2 cards, so I should just call. And not their failure to understand that made me feel like I did have an actual pretty significant edge. That, you're right, would be very volatile and hard to realize in a shallow stack environment. But I think if I ran that tournament 1,000 times, I was worth my extra $1,600.
I agree with that. I think that was well articulated as well. Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm looking over both your handed mobs. You guys have a ton of cashes this year, both of you. So you both are still very active in the poker scene. What does poker look like for you guys in the future? Are you guys going to be continuing to grind it out? Is this obviously you have a lot going on. You have the podcast, you guys are doing commentating, you're writing books, you're playing poker. What's the priority for you guys?
Every year I tell my wife that I'll play less live and I'll do less traveling, and I end up being a liar at the end of the year. I'm not sure. Like that's always the plan, but I do seem to get sucked in. Myself and David have actually we're number 1 and number 2 in terms of number of cashes on the Hen of Irish players, and that's a lot of that is just down to volume. If we go to a festival, we play as much as we can. We grind really hard, play all the side events when we're not involved in the main event, etc., etc. And that's kind of it. But I think I'll try and play less live stops for sure. Already thinking about my WSOP campaign. I've tried different things down the years. At the start of my career, I used to go for the full thing. That's definitely too long.
Sure.
Then there was a period where I used to go for quite a long one, but I would take a break in the middle, fly to New York, meet my wife, and then come back. Last year I did actually go for a very long one. I went for 5 weeks, which was too long. So I think I will probably just arrive just before the main event and maybe stay for a week after the main and play the last few events. So generally, I think cut back on that front. I'm still very busy on the other fronts, as you mentioned, like apart from the chip race and the books, I do quite a lot of coaching as well, one-to-one coaching, and I also I have my own training site, Simplified Poker, and I've been putting a lot of work into that recently. We've been working on a course on multi-way because the solvers are they're finally good multi-way solvers. So similar to the other stuff that I've done in the past, as soon as the solvers are able to do something, I'm interested in sort of like getting in there immediately and trying to get ahead of the curve, and pass that on. The target audience of this site is very much sort of like what we call serious recreational players. It's not necessarily pros. It's just guys who they don't have 50 hours a week to study with solvers, so they want somebody who can do that kind of work for them and tell them what the important points are. So I'm putting more and more of my time into that as well.
Okay.
But I still try and play as much online as I can. Like online poker is still my first love. It's the thing I've made the most money from. It's the thing I've enjoyed the most over the past 17 years that I've been playing.
And you get to spend time with your wife.
And I have to spend time with my wife.
You sound so excited about that part.
No, I mean, but you're actually right. That
It's
is
huge.
more of a priority as well.
Yeah.
Because I'm not that young anymore. I sometimes I feel like I blinked in the last 15 years, just went by in a blur. And if I do that again, suddenly I'm 75, and Yeah, I don't want that to happen.
It goes quicker as you
Yeah.
get older. I'm learning. I'm approaching 40, and I feel like my 30s just went through. It's just
My theory there is that, when you're 5, a year is 20% of your life, so it feels like a
Mhm.
very long time. But by the time you're 50, it's only 2% of your life. So
yeah, that makes
yeah.
sense. That makes sense. And then what about you, David?
Yeah, I make the same promise and break the same promise every year. I do like live poker, and I think Dara likes live poker too, but I think it's always that challenge of finding the balance. And I think if somehow we could kind of wave a magic wand, Dara, and we could both play live poker 5 or 6 days a month, every month, and then have 3 weeks of not doing it, we'd actually really love that. But
Yeah.
it never falls that way, because sometimes you end up with a glut of loads of live poker in 1 month, and then you might have a whole month of none of it. And it comes in fits and starts like that, particularly when there's specific events that you kind of feel are like can't miss events. I think that's always the challenge. I don't play a lot of live poker anymore. I'll be the first to admit I probably play 2 days a week.
Okay.
That really fell away. I had kids about 8 years ago,
Okay.
and as soon as family kind of was introduced to it at the same time as what was then a Unibet ambassadorial contract. Now, obviously, we're with WPT Global and very happy to be. But the consultancy work for them, the live commitments that would come about from being attached to that brand, the videos that we have to make, and obviously an even bigger these days slate of content for the chip race, which is sponsored by WPT Global, is a priority. Like, it's probably number one priority for me, maybe
Right.
for Dara playing, and that stuff is equal, but like that gets probably more of my hours than anything else. So yeah, online I still play Sundays. I still try and play another day in the week, but I don't play loads. When I do have those like little 2 week spats where there's a series to play, I do sharpen up, and I notice my poker brain's still not too bad, and I get better when I play more. But finding the time to play more regularly online is definitely unlikely to change. I do about maybe 100 tournaments a year live, which is probably what Dara does as well. And then for me, maybe the one difference, like Dara has the training site and more coaching and that kind of stuff. Probably for me, I do more commentary than Dara these days. We used to both commentate together on a lot of stuff. But as Dara's had to kind of prioritize, that's fallen down the list of his priorities a little bit, and it went up kind of higher on mine. So I did the Malta Poker Festival just recently. We both do the Irish Poker Open for Poker Stars when that comes around, and that's a great fun one to be part of. And I'm really lucky that I last year I did the WPT World Championship at the Win. And I think it went quite well. And fortunately, I've been asked back. So it must have gone at least decently to be asked back for that. So great fun, obviously, working with Jamie Kerstetter and Jesse Sylvia on those broadcasts. That's the Sharehand team that do the Tritons. So they're very professional, team to work with. And I worked with them for years on Merit streams in Cyprus, which was a great pleasure to work with them again on those things, because they really are the best in the business.
Yeah, we haven't had the chance to speak with Jamie, but we actually had Jesse Sylvia on the podcast maybe about a year ago or so, and he's
it was a
just
year.
just an incredible poker mind and an incredible dude on top of all of it. But really, being able to pick his brain was incredible, and I look forward to being able to hear your commentary on the WPT Championship this year. That'll be super exciting. My wife and I will be in the Bahamas. Wes will be there at the WPT. But my hope is that someday we can cross. I mean, obviously you guys are quite far away from us at this point, but whether it's at the WSOP or we somehow make our way to the Irish Poker Open or whatever it might be, that we can say hi to you guys, that'd be lovely for sure. We do have a reoccurring question we do ask all of our guests. Let's go ahead and start with you, David. Poker, is it an art or is it a science?
Haha. Oh, wow. I guess it's the cop-out answer, but it's definitely both, right? All of what Dara said earlier, and he always articulates it so well about sort of getting the fundamentals in, those pillars of understanding, getting the framework. I guess that's more akin to science for sure. But the dance, the exploitative second pillar in his framework is definitely a little bit more artful, a little bit more requiring on-the-spot perceptions, little quick judgments, and that certainly feels a little bit more artistic. But at the same time, and I'm sure a very good counter-argument will now be made by my host on the chip race, there's absolutely a way to understand that as a science as well.
And you, Dara?
Yeah, I think it's science, to be honest. I always feel that math is the language of the universe. And even when people talk about stuff like psychology and all the rest of it, yeah, that does definitely play a role, and that has obviously a more artistic component to it. Understanding your image and manipulating it and understanding other people's images. But at the end of the day, like even when you've done that, it kind of comes down to, okay, well, what's my range? What's your range? And how are you going to play your range? And therefore, what's the best way for me to play? And that is a science. You once you program all the correct assumptions into the solver, you cannot argue with a solver. You cannot say this is the way they play. These are the two ranges. And then when the solver comes back and says, this is how you play, you can't go, no, sorry, that's wrong, because it isn't. So in that sense, I think it is very scientific. But, the other stuff around the soft skills. And then there's other skills too, which go into being a professional, more in the cash game, more like I imagine. But, getting invited to the right games, bankroll management, keeping the whales happy, all this stuff, and that's more of an art for sure.
Yeah, well, I'll say it to both points. Like David, how you had said in a satellite, you have to teach the person to your left that they're supposed to fold everything at a certain point. I think that is like probably one of the biggest pieces of artwork, because like one thing about ICM is if you are like in a chippy V standpoint, if your opponent is making mistakes against you, you're going to make money just in the long run as long as you're playing a better strategy. With ICM, like if they're making mistakes, they can crush both of your EV, and it spreads around to everyone else at the table. So you kind of have to teach them not to do that in a way. But to Dara's point, yeah, I tend to be more the science person. I think that was really well articulated. It's like someone's range is their range, and we'll never literally know what someone's range is going to be. And I think it's easy for people to when they hear us talking about a range, they can kind of think, oh, you're just spitting out what the default solver range is. It's like that's not actually what we mean. It's like, let's figure out what all the hands are that they would play this exact way and at what frequency. And then if we actually have that answer, we can get a scientific answer to what our response should be. And so it's about getting as close to that as you can. So,
yeah, the one thing I think we can all probably agree on is, however you posit the playing of game of poker and what category you put that in, podcasting is definitely an art form. And I think, you guys will appreciate sort of, how you have to, there's some preparation. There is a bit of science behind doing it well. But I think in the poker space, obviously, and we're a self-selecting group of people here, but finding artistic ways to put forward the vision of why poker is a great game that more and more people should play, and really is maybe the perfect game, in many ways. There's lots of great ones, chess, obviously, backgammon. Dara, you've played a lot of these as well. But I just feel like poker is just maybe as close to perfect a game that we have. It's endlessly complicated. And yeah, figuring out creative ways to sell that to people, even if it's cynical marketing or it's a very worthy podcast or piece of content you want to make so that your audience will hear it. I think that's all very important in terms of growing the game we love.
Well said. Well said. Where can our listeners find you guys in terms of your podcast?
Yeah, that's a good question. I used to say Twitter, but Twitter has kind of turned into a hellscape now recently. Argue about politics.
Yeah.
So it's actually more difficult. I think I still have a landing page, my name, daraocarney.com, which basically pulls together all the different strands of what I do, the books, the training site, the coaching, the podcast, obviously, and the rest of it. But yeah, I guess follow us on social media. We're both pretty active on Twitter, at Dara Carney and DK Lappin, on and also on Instagram. I'm Do Carney there, no ARA. And yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of the answer these days, social media.
Yeah, I definitely still doom scroll through that hellscape more regularly than I do anything else. So you'll definitely find me there. And of course, if you want to listen to the show, we're on all the popular podcast platforms. I'd be surprised if there wasn't one that we're not on. And yeah, obviously you find us on the tables at WPT Global. There's the plug. Got it in.
Yeah,
Yours,
there you
Doug.
go.
You're not the only one who can do an ad read.
That's awesome. And I will say that all of the, you guys send me the information you want me to post. I'll put everything in the show notes. So if you guys want to find these guys, check out their podcast, check out the content they're creating, the books they're writing. Check out WPT Global, all that good stuff. Make sure to check out the show notes to find all that good stuff. Wes, any last thoughts from me, friend?
Oh man, I mean, I feel like we could talk for a long time. There's so much other stuff.
Yeah, I agree.
The one question I actually did want to ask you guys is, you've had all of these, top level poker players. What is one thing that stands out to you, that surprised you about interviewing all these players? Whether it's something about how they view life or poker, how they play, open-ended.
I think for me, the big takeaway is sort of the project of the chip race, and always was, which is that we're not a monolith. We're quite the opposite of that. And actually, it's sort of impossible to answer that question cleanly, at least, because I don't think any poker player is like any other poker player. We're all united by some maybe nocturnal thing or degenerate thing or being on the periphery thing or loving games or the way we see patterns maybe better than other people do, or there'll be loads of ways that you can unite as sort of a poker player in a sort of uniform way. But actually a very light scratch of the surface will reveal that we come from every walk of life, every gender, creed, cultural background, age. And actually that's the real beauty of sitting down at a poker table, is how that whole tableau is in front of you and you get to know people from every part of the world and every maybe philosophical position.
Yeah, well said. Any last thoughts from you, Dara?
Yeah, I would say I was trying to think of the most surprising, and to be honest, it wasn't really surprising. Like as David said, like every guest we have on is an actual real person, and we always, particularly when you're dealing with some of the bigger people, you tend to sort of the public image, and but you kind of often don't realize that the person underneath is a little bit different. And the person who really sticks out in my mind in that front is Phil Hellmuth. We were lucky enough to get Helmut to agree to come on the show at quite an early stage. We probably weren't a big enough podcast yet to get Helmut on, but at the time we had a joint sponsor, an app called Share My Pair, which unfortunately is no longer
familiar
around.
with them, yep.
I kind of leaned on them to get Phil on. Phil clearly had no clue who we were and had no idea what to expect. So he did exactly what you'd expect from Phil. He showed up wearing all of his sponsors' gears, his cap, everything, all the patches, everything. And then the first thing we had to do to him was explain to him that this was an audio podcast and nobody would. And he was devastated. And he was like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess I'll give you a few minutes then, but that's it. You're just going to get 10 minutes." So
oh, really?
I actually had a bit of insight into his personality because I'd seen him at the Irish Open a few years ago. And I remember sending David a message saying, "Okay, we're not going to get a good interview in 8 minutes. So what we're going to do for that 8 minutes is we're just going to flatter him to death. We're going to tell him he's the greatest ever and why he's the greatest ever and why it's ridiculous that people not everybody in the world recognizes he's the greatest ever." So we kind of did that. He defrosted, warmed up, and he ended up giving us an entire hour in a spot where he never could admit to more than 20 minutes. We actually had to cut the interview into 2 shows, and his wife literally had to drag him away from the computer.
You guys are that is so genius. Like what? Like you?
Smart,
I mean, you. Oh my God! Like this is a prime example of why you're a professional poker player. Like, you exploited Phil Hellmuth. It was great.
Yeah. But it was just recognizing, he's a human being as well, and
and he loves compliments.
Yeah, and his underlying kind of motivation, I mean, I was going to say I technically met him once 10 years ago, but he's someone who he's motivated by winning those bracelets, and his name is at the top of tournament poker in that sense. And so I think that's a great way to like kind of turn,
And it was a big moment for us too, because not only was he the biggest guest, and whether we continued with the show was going to hinge on how we dealt with these kinds of big guests. But like, if you listen to that show now, and it stands up really well, and it is one of our earliest ones. I think it might be our 20th show or 25th show. And we did all the things that Dara described. And then like Phil talked about his childhood, talked about his relationship with his wife, talked about his therapy, talked about his inferiority complex with his siblings. He ends up singing at one point. Like, it ends up being this incredible interview with loads of kind of components to it. It's kind of beautiful thing, actually, when somebody sort of feels like safe and able to be vulnerable.
He got
And
off the script and then became himself.
Exactly. But I think that's something that Dara and I have really kind of gotten really good at as years go by. Like, that was our first test and we were in the deep end, and Dara taught on his feet there and did brilliantly by us that we could salvage that interview, and not just salvage, actually make it a really good one. But I think as the years have gone by, we've understood a few things. And I think one for me, and this is advice to any podcaster, maybe in any walk of life, not just poker, not just you guys doing it as well. But like, if you can well research your guest, like the thing I hate, and you didn't do it, so thank you for that, is go, how'd you get into poker? What's your origin story? Sort of, that you didn't know ahead of time, or at least you conveyed that you didn't, and you just made it the guest have to tell their story from the outside. We never do that. We immediately tell that person's early biography. If we are going to do it chronologically, which we don't always do, we've different structures in mind. But if we do it that way, we immediately let them know that we know about those key points in their early, getting into the game. And we'd use that as a leaping off point to get to a feeling. How did you feel when this thing happened? That was the first big stumbling block. How did you feel? And then immediately they go, oh, I haven't had to explain it all. And I've been fast forward into a place now that I'm talking about feelings really early. And now you've broken down the first layer with them. Yeah. And if you can, by the way you question people, reassure them that you've done your homework, you've looked into them. Like I always say, when I'm researching a guest, I spend a day with them. I look at all the back interviews they've done. I just spend a day with them in my ears, hearing their voice, listening to them talk. Yeah. And I constantly look for moments when previous interviews, no fault of theirs, by the way, the interviewer didn't think of the perfect follow-up question. But now with the luxury of time, and I'm listening to it calmly, walking, around the bays here in Malta, I know what that excellent question would be. So I just zoom them back to that moment and I say, look, do you remember when you said that in this other interview? And I'm piggybacking that moment. Here's the follow-up question that I wish someone had asked that's really incisive. And then again, they go, oh, that's brilliant. That's another really good question you've asked me. And you've given me this scope to answer it in a certain way. So I think when you learn those tricks, which comes over time, like, again, we've been doing it 10 years. And if we listen to our first few shows, we would cringe a little bit at how green we were at it. But, obviously we had something about us. And as time went by, we used our skills and we honed our skills. And if you can very quickly reassure your guest and get them into language which is more about their feelings, obviously you want to hear about their thoughts, but if you can get them into talking about their feelings, you can often suddenly open yourselves up to getting a much better interview than you would have otherwise.
I appreciate that.
That's
advice.
a great piece of advice. Yeah.
100%.
I think we get better,
and we get better as we continue. I mean, it's tough too. I mean, I remember our first few interviews. It's like we had never done it before, and we're green, and we're trying to,
And we mostly don't even. Most of our episodes aren't even interviews. We kind of do a mix of strategy talk.
We're primarily a strategy-based episode, and when we do get guests on, we do want to kind of pick their brains to show, because like you mentioned earlier, David, is like. Poker comes in all shapes and forms, or poker players do, and they come from all different backgrounds. So to be able to see how they all kind of came to this one game and how they view it so differently is kind of one thing we want to pick apart from our guests.
Yeah. The one other thing I would say is, and maybe you said you were the me in your relationship, so maybe
I'm the producer as well.
What I would say is understanding sort of your presentation and understanding your co-host's one. Like, I think now Dara and I understand what each of us brings to the table, how we're different, that's a Dara question. Dara should ask that one. This is more of a Dave question. David can do that one. But also dialing up your different skills. Like, if I need Dara to kind of like, turn the gauge from 3 up to 7 on one thing, or sometimes it's maybe me if I want to be a bit more hostile with a guest that we want to interrogate a bit. It's like, okay, this is a good one for you, Dave, to turn yourself up to 10 on that sort of skill that you have of kind of getting under the skin of somebody. Using those kind of ranges that you both have is another one. And yeah, first of all, like again, I think Dara and I both understand how we can use one another.
I think as we continue to do this, Wes and I kind of definitely notice those, where what our strengths are and try to implement those as well, for sure. Mostly for Wes, it's bringing the brains, and me, it's just the shit talking.
I mean, I can't even shit talk you after you say I'm bringing the brains. Like, what? I can't add on to that.
I've gotten good at this, Wes. But anyways, guys, I just want to, thank you again so much for taking the time to be on here with us today. If you guys enjoyed, listening to Dara, and David, make sure to check out the show notes where you can find all of their content. And with that, we'll end and see you guys in the next episode.